Young man finds dog and his puppies in a trash can inside a bag. He saves them and takes them with his grandmother. Weeks later, that dog does something shocking with this lady, leaving everyone with their mouths open. Samuel was a young man of common, but with a heart that seemed too big for his body. He was 22 years old, he worked in the trash can in the city, separating recyclable materials, and he shared the little home with his grandmother, Mrs. Lucia, who had raised him since he was little. Life was not easy, but Samuel always had a smile on his face. He said the world was already hard enough for him to be. That day, the sun was burning and the smell of the garbage seemed worse than ever. He pushed the cart through the ground, looking for anything that could be useful. It was a tiring routine, but he was used to it. However, something stopped him at that moment. A low, almost imperceptible sound. It looked like a tear. He took off his headphones thinking he was imagining things, but there he was again, a weak and desperate moan. Samuel looked around, trying to locate where the noise came from. He walked through torn bags, piles of plastic and crushed cans, until he saw something move. A black bag, tied very tightly, trembled slightly. At that moment, a cold step ran over his back. What could this be? He thought as he approached carefully. She knew that in the dumpster one could find everything and they were not always good things. When she approached, she crouched and touched the bag. She was light, but there was something alive inside. With trembling hands, she began to undo the knots. Each knot seemed like a challenge, as if she were opening the door to something much bigger than she could imagine. When she finally managed to open it, she was still for a moment, looking at what was inside. She was a bitch, skinny, so thin that all the bones of the body could be counted. His eyes were glassy, as if fate had already accepted his cruel fate. Next to him, 5 small puppies, so fragile that they could barely lift their heads. They trembled, a mixture of cold and hunger that Samuel had never seen before. His heart shrunk like never before. He felt a knot in his throat and had to breathe deeply not to cry. The dog slowly lifted his head and looked at him directly. It was a different look. That mixed despair and hope. As if he was saying, "You are my last chance. Please, don't leave me here." Samuel could not take his eyes away. He felt a weight on his shoulders, but at the same time, a responsibility that he could not ignore. "Come, little. I'm going to help you," he said, with a low voice, almost as if he were talking to a child. He took the dog carefully, trying not to hurt his fragile body, and put the puppies in the bag. Was the best thing he could do at that moment. With a piece of cardboard, he improvised a bed inside the basket of his bicycle. The puppies cried quietly, while the mother looked at them worried, but seemed to trust Samuel. He knew he didn't have much to offer, but he decided at that moment that he would do everything possible. When he began to pedal back home, the weight of the bag was nothing compared to the weight he felt in his heart. Every meter he walked, he looked at the bitch. That kept his eyes on him. Even exhausted, thin and weak, he looked at him as if he wanted to say, "Thank you." When Samuel arrived home, he still had his heart racing. He barely had time to park his bike in the backyard before running inside, calling Donna Lucia, the lady who always waited for him with a cup of hot tea. He left the kitchen in a hurry, drying his hands on the front door. "What happened? Boy, you look like you've seen something serious." She opened her mouth to answer, but was interrupted by a weak moan that came from the bag. Donna Lucia opened her eyes like plates and took a hand to her chest. "What did you bring there, Samuel?" Without answering, she put the bag on the floor and began to take out the puppies, one by one, with all the care in the world. When she finally took the dog out, Donna Lucia took her hands to her mouth, horrified. Holy heaven, who would have the courage to do this? Samuel sighed, feeling the weight of the question. He had no answer. He couldn't leave them. Grandma. They would have died there. Grandma's gaze, which mixed concern and tenderness, made it clear that he understood. Donna Lucia was tough sometimes, but she had a soft heart like his. Without saying anything else, she knelt next to the bitch and caressed her head gently. "It's okay, little one, we'll take care of them." That was enough. Samuel ran to look for an old blanket and improvised a bed in a corner of the room. Donna Lucia brought a cup of water. Meanwhile, Samuel heated some milk in the kitchen. He didn't know exactly what he was doing, but it was the only thing that occurred to him at that moment. The dog, whom he decided to call a Star, didn't move. He was so weak that he only raised his head from time to time to look at the puppies, as if he wanted to make sure they were still there. Samuel approached with the milk in a spoon. "Come on, Star, just a little bit. You need to eat." She approached the spoon, but she put her face away. She was too scared to trust. Then, Donna Lucia had an idea. She took a piece of bread and soaked it in milk, offering it calmly. After a lot of insistence, Star finally licked a little piece. It was a small advance, but it filled both of them with hope. Meanwhile, the puppies were so weak that they couldn't even open their eyes. Samuel looked for an old syringe that he kept in the drawer and began to feed them drop by drop. The night was long. Samuel and Donna Lucia turned around, one taking care of the puppies and the other trying to make Estrella eat a little more. The smell of the trash can still impregnated her fur, but that was the least. What mattered now was to make sure that she and the puppies survived. When the clock struck 3 in the morning, Samuel was exhausted. He sat on the floor, next to the improvised bed, and watched Estrella. Despite being thin, wounded and weak, there was something special in his gaze. It was as if he knew that he was now in a safe place. Suddenly, Estrella raised her head and licked her hand slowly, almost as if it were a thank you. That gesture, so small, made Samuel's eyes fill with tears. He looked at Donna Lucia, who was sleeping in the chair with one of the puppies on her lap, and murmured to himself, "We will make it. You will be fine." Before continuing, remember to like and subscribe to the channel if you love animals and you like to hear stories about them. The day dawned and Samuel had just closed his eyes. The room was full of life, but it was not that healthy and lively kind of life that brings immediate joy. It was a fighting scenario. Every moment, he was worried about the state of the puppies, who could barely emit a sound. But clearly without the strength to move the body. Donna Lucia left the kitchen with a hot oatmeal cup and looked at Samuel. "Boy, you also need to eat. If you fall, who's going to take care of them?" He knew his grandmother was right, but his mind was elsewhere. He took the cup, gave a few quick spoons and returned his attention to the little ones. Each puppy looked like a ball of hair, thin and fragile, as if any strong wind could take them. "Grandma, do you think you can do it?" he asked in almost a whisper. Donna Lucia sighed and knelt beside him. "I don't know, Samuel, but we'll do everything we can. And the rest? Well, we'll leave the rest in God's hands." Samuel got up with a new sense of urgency. He knew he didn't have much time. He took his bike and pedaled to the nearest pharmacy. He didn't have money for a veterinarian, but he remembered some advice he had heard from neighbors on how to take care of sick animals. He bought new syrups, syringes, and even a recommended food supplement for recovering animals. He spent almost all the money of the month but did not think twice. When he returned, he found Donna Lucia trying to give Estrella water. The dog drank slowly, with an expression that mixed fatigue and gratitude. "I got this, Grandma," he said, showing the things he bought. Donna Lucia smiled with a tired but relieved smile. This is how the most difficult days Samuel had faced began. He and his grandmother created a routine. Every 2 hours, they fed the puppies with the syringe. Samuel's hands trembled every time he held one, fearing to hurt him or do something wrong. Estrella, although without strength, did the best she could. When one of the puppies cried, she stretched her neck and licked her head. Samuel noticed that, despite everything, he did not give up. There were moments of despair. One night, one of the puppies was so weak that he stopped reacting. Samuel took it in his hands. He felt his little heart beating so slowly that it seemed that he would stop at any moment. He tried to reanimate him with sweat and a silent prayer. Donna Lucia watched him, holding back his tears, knowing that perhaps they could not save everyone. But the puppy, as if it were a miracle, began to move. Small movements that filled Samuel with hope. He looked at Donna Lucia with bright eyes. "Grandma will be fine. Feel like she will." Donna Lucia smiled, wiping away a tear. "Then we kept trying, Samuel. They all deserve an opportunity." Day after day, between headings on the sofa and fast food, they fought together. Samuel lost count of how many times he fed each puppy, but he knew that each boot made the difference. Estrella also began to react. He raised his head more frequently and even tried to crawl to drink water by himself. After a week, Samuel noticed something different. One of the puppies, whom he had called Volt, tried to take his first step. It was a small movement, but Samuel almost exploded with joy. "Grandma, look at this, he's walking." Mrs. Lucia ran and, for the first time in days, released a shell. "This little one is strong, Samuel. Will you be okay? You'll see." The fight was far from over, but that little moment of victory filled the house with hope. Samuel realized that, despite all the challenges, he had never felt so eager to move on. The days passed, and Samuel's house and Donna Lucia seemed to have transformed into a small improvised hospital. In a corner of the room, the bed made of star blankets and her puppies was now full of life. The little ones began to react, to move more and even to release some shy barking, as if they were rediscovering the world. But, despite the advances, it was still a daily battle. Samuel tried to keep everything going. He continued to work in the garbage dump, but now he was doing his turn faster, eager to go home and see how the little ones were doing. Donna Lucia stayed with them during the day, making sure that no dog would stay behind. "Estrella is reacting well," she said every time Samuel arrived. "But these puppies are naughty. It's a lot of work feeding them all." That afternoon, Samuel arrived earlier, carrying a bag full of supplies. He had got some food for Estrella and a special milk for the puppies, with the help of a friend from the pharmacy who was moved by the story. "Look at this, Grandma. Let's see if Estrella likes this," he said, placing the plate with food on the floor. Estrella raised her head, curious. But it was the first time she smelled something new. With a little doubt, she approached and gave the first bite. To Samuel's surprise, she began to eat with more desire than she expected. She looked at Donna Lucia with a huge smile. "Is she getting better? Grandma, she is becoming strong again." But the fight was not only physical. The bitch still had that look, as if she were carrying the weight of the abandonment she had suffered. Samuel noticed it when she was too still, watching the puppies with a concern that only a mother understands. He knew that Estrella needed more than food. He needed love, feeling that he was finally safe. And that was exactly what Samuel gave him. Every night, before going to sleep, he sat next to him, caressed his head and said, "You are strong, Estrella. You are a warrior. We are going to overcome all this together." Estrella seemed to understand, as if saying, "I trust you." Meanwhile, the puppies kept growing. Samuel and Donna Lucia gave everyone names. Toby, the most energetic, who always tried to walk before the others. Nina, the smallest, but with a look full of determination. Astro, the one who cried the most, always looking for attention. Luna, who loved to snuggle close to her mother. And Sol, who was always the first to wake up every morning. One night, as he fed the puppies, Samuel noticed something. Estrella was standing by herself, watching the little ones with more energy in her eyes. She looked like someone else. Her body still showed signs of abuse, but her spirit was stronger. It was as if she knew she was winning the battle. "Look at Estrella," Grandma said, Samuel excited. Donna Lucia approached the room and, seeing her like that, she put a hand on her grandson's shoulder. "You did this, Samuel. You gave him a new opportunity." He denied it with his head, without being able to hold back the tears. "She deserves it, Grandma. She and these puppies deserve everything." No matter how difficult the routine was, every little progress felt like a victory. Estrella started getting out of bed on her own, playing softly with the puppies and even moving her tail when Samuel came from work. It was a long way, but finally, a spark of hope lit the little home. It was a cold dawn, one of those in which silence is so deep that any sound seems like a scream. Samuel slept deeply, exhausted after another day taking care of Estrella and the puppies. Donna Lucia also rested in the room next door. In the living room, Estrella was lying down, surrounded by the puppies, all crouched on an improvised blanket. Everything seemed peaceful, but Estrella, like a true protector, always kept an ear close. She was the one who noticed it first. A strange smell, subtle at first, but which soon began to intensify. It was smoke. He raised his head, smelled the air and shook. He looked at the puppies, restless, and then he saw it. An orange light began to shine in the kitchen. The fire was growing. Without thinking it, Estrella began to bark with all his strength. A strong, urgent sound, as if he knew that everyone's life depended on it. Samuel woke up from a jump, the heart beating at full speed. "What's wrong, little one?" he murmured, in a slumber. But when he opened the door of his room, the strong smell still hit him like a slap. He froze for a second, but soon he understood what was happening. "Grandma? Wake up." He ran to Mrs. Lucia's room, finding her confused and coughing. "Samuel, what's going on?" He grabbed her by the arm. "The house is on fire. Grandma? We have to get out now." Donna Lucia tried to grab something, but Samuel yelled, "There's no time, let's go." He managed to take her to the hallway, but then she stopped suddenly. The puppies and Estrella. Despair invaded him. They were still in the room, near the flames. The fire was already part of the kitchen and the heat was unbearable. The smoke filled Samuel's lungs, making him cough. He tried to move forward, but Donna Lucia held him by the arm. It's dangerous, but he couldn't think of anything else. He had to save Estrella and the puppies. Before he could do anything, a sound caught his attention. It was Estrella. She was in the middle of the smoke, standing, looking directly at Samuel. And then he acted. Estrella ran to Mrs. Lucia's room, ignoring the heat and the smoke that burned her coat. She grabbed the edge of Mrs. Lucia's dress with her teeth and started pulling hard, as if saying. Samuel stayed without reaction, observing the value of the bitch, who seemed determined to save everyone. He helped his grandmother get out of the house, taking her to the patio. But Estrella did not stop there. As soon as Donna Lucia was safe, he turned around and ran back to the room. "Estrella, no, come back here," screamed Samuel, but it was as if she knew what she had to do. Time seemed to have stopped. Samuel stood there, the heart beating so fast that it seemed it was going to explode. The house was full of smoke and I could barely see anything. Suddenly he saw her again. Estrella appeared among the smoke, carrying one of the puppies around the neck. With effort, he left him in the backyard and immediately returned for the next one. Samuel tried to stop her, but she ignored his screams. One by one, Estrella took out all the puppies. When she left with the last one, her body was covered with hay. His fur was wrinkled, and his breathing was heavy and cut. He made the last move, but Samuel ran to hold her before she fell. "Star, you did this. You saved everyone," he said with a broken voice as the tears ran down his face. He hugged her as if it were the last thing he would do. Star, even exhausted, raised his gaze towards him and slightly moved his tail. It was as if he said, "I fulfill my duty." They ran to help. They managed to put out the flames before the house was completely destroyed, but the scare and the scene of Estrella's bravery were recorded in everyone. Donna Lucia, with tears in her eyes, knelt next to Samuel and the dog. This dog saved our lives." That night, while the fire turned into ashes, Samuel remained next to Estrella and the puppies. He caressed his head, trying to contain the tears that insisted on leaving. "I promise you, Star. From now on, you will never have to go through anything alone. I will take care of you just as you took care of us." Star closed her eyes, finally resting, knowing that she was now at home, with the family that would never abandon her. The next morning the fire came with a mixture of relief and concern. The house was damaged, with part of the kitchen completely destroyed, but the most important thing was that everyone was alive. Estrella was still very tired, lying down with the puppies around her, but her breathing was already calmer. Samuel and Donna Lucia took care of her like a family member. Because at that moment, that was it. The neighbors, upon learning of the story, began to appear with food, clothes, and even materials to help in the reconstruction. Estrella's courage quickly became the topic of conversation of the entire community. "That bitch is an angel," one of the neighbors said while he was helping Samuel to clean the rubble. They all joined together to support the family. And that gave Samuel a strength that he had never felt before. While he was helping rebuild the house, Samuel could not stop looking at Estrella. Every time he saw her with the puppies, he felt immense pride. He knew that she was not only a survivor, but a true heroine. And it was there, in the middle of that chaos, that Samuel made a decision. Would do everything possible to pay back what Estrella had done for them. Over time, the house was being rebuilt, and the routine returned to normal. But something had changed. Samuel, who was previously just a young man trying to survive, now had a bigger purpose. He decided to start a small project to help abandoned animals, like Estrella and her puppies. Using her story as inspiration, he began to mobilize the community to collect food, medicines, and even temporary homes for other dogs. The puppies, who now grew quickly, were full of energy and vitality. Toby was the most adventurous, always exploring every corner of the patio. Nina, the smallest, was the most affectionate, adoring to snuggle with Estrella. Sun and Moon always played together, while Astro, the most cute, followed Samuel wherever he went. One day, while watching the puppies run through the patio, Samuel sat down next to Estrella and caressed her head. "You know what changed my life? Before you appeared, I only lived to work and pay the bills. But now I understand that I can do more, that I can help others like you." Estrella, as always, looked at him with those eyes that seemed to understand everything. She moved her tail slowly, showing that, in some way, she also knew that she had found the family she needed so much. 2 months later, Samuel's project was gaining momentum. With the help of neighbors and even some small donations he got online, he set up an improvised shelter in the backyard of the house. It wasn't big, but it was enough to give a second chance to abandoned dogs. Estrella was the head of the place, welcoming every new animal with the patience and care of a true mother. One night, while Samuel was sitting on the terrace with Dona Lucia, he looked at Estrella, who was sleeping quietly surrounded by the puppies, and smiled. "Grandma, if it weren't for her, maybe we wouldn't be here today. She saved our home, our family, and also gave me a new reason to live." Mrs. Lucia smiled, excited. Sometimes, Samuel, miracles come in forms that one never expects. In our case, she arrived with 4 legs and a huge heart. From that day, the routine in Samuel's house, Mrs. Lucia and Estrella, changed forever. The little home, which was once a simple and quiet space, now was alive. The puppies ran through the yard, exploring every corner as if it were a new world to conquer. Toby, as always, led the adventures, while Nina, more shy, preferred to snuggle with Dona Lucia, who now always had a smile on her face. But the challenges did not disappear. Reconstructing the house after the fire was just the beginning. Samuel had to balance his work in the garbage dump with the care of the house and the new improvised refuge for the dogs. There were days when he felt exhausted, but he just had to look at Estrella to find strength. She was a constant reminder that, even in the greatest difficulties, courage and love could overcome any obstacle. Estrella, on the other hand, seemed to understand her new role. She was not only a survivor, but a leader. Every new dog that arrived at the shelter was received by her with patience and care. Estrella demonstrated that, despite everything she had faced, she still had a heart full of kindness. Samuel used to say, "She is the true owner of this place. I only follow your orders." Mrs. Lucia, who used to spend the days taking care of the house, now found joy in helping Samuel with the dogs. She spent hours cooking small special portions for the most fragile dogs. As she told them stories as if they were children. "You are lucky to have found Samuel and Estrella," she would tell them as she petted Luna, who loved to curl up close to her. The days were full, but they were also happy. Every puppy that found a home brought a mixture of sadness and joy. It was hard for Samuel and Dona Lucia to say goodbye, but knowing they were being given a new lease on life was comforting. Estrella watched each departure calmly, as if he knew his mission was coming true. At night, when everything finally calmed down, Samuel sat in the patio, looking at the starry sky. Star was always by his side, lying down with the puppies sleeping close by. He caressed his head and said, "You are the reason for all this, you know? If it weren't for you, he might never have believed he could make the difference." Star looked at him, his eyes shining under the soft moonlight, as if he understood every word. For the first time in a long time, he was in peace. He no longer had to fight alone, he no longer had to fear abandonment. Surrounded by a family that loved him, Estrella finally found what he had always deserved. A safe home, full of love, where he could always be who he was. A protector, a mother, and a symbol of strength. What began as an unlikely rescue became a life full of purpose. Samuel Estrella. Donna Lucia and the puppies were more than one family. They were the living proof that love and courage, even in the darkest moments, have the power to transform everything. Thanks for watching the video until the end. Remember to like, subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with your opinion about this story.